The sewing machine needle pierced my finger, a sharp sting against the dull ache that had settled in my bones. Crimson welled, a tiny mirror reflecting the immense pressure I was under. They were all waiting, expectant vultures circling what was left of my passion, my skill, my very self. They thought they could bleed me dry. They thought they could take everything. But they were wrong. If your own mother has ever treated you unfairly, subscribe now. My life had become a relentless cycle of fabric scraps, late nights, and the constant, grating demands of my mother, Marlene, and my younger sister, Tiffany. They saw me, Samantha, not as a daughter or a sister, but as a seamstress, a glorified servant whose sole purpose was to cater to their whims. Tiffany, the golden child, the pageant princess, the one who could do no wrong, always needed a new dress, a perfectly tailored outfit, something to make her shine even brighter. And Marlene, ever the enabler, would simply point her finger at me, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that always masked a sharp edge, and say, "Samantha, darling, could you just whip something up for your sister? It's just a small favor." A small favor that consumed days, sometimes weeks, of my life. I ran my own small business, barely making enough to pay the bills, but my family acted as if my time was theirs to command. The injustice of it all gnawed at me, a slow-burning resentment that threatened to consume me. I longed to scream, to refuse, to tell them that I had my own dreams, my own aspirations, but the words always caught in my throat, choked by years of ingrained obedience and the fear of disappointing them. So, I sewed. I sewed until my fingers were raw, until my eyes burned with exhaustion, until the beautiful creations I crafted felt like shackles binding me to a life I didn't choose. The endless requests weren't the worst part. It was the demeaning comments, the subtle jabs disguised as helpful criticism. "Samantha, darling, that hemline is a little uneven, don't you think? Tiffany deserves perfection, after all." Perfection. A standard I could never reach, a goalpost constantly moving further away. The final straw was the state pageant. Tiffany, naturally, was a contestant, and Marlene had decided that she needed a custom-made gown, a show-stopping creation that would guarantee her victory. And, of course, I was the one tasked with creating it. "Samantha, this is your chance to really shine," Marlene had said, her eyes gleaming with ambition. "Imagine the publicity. Your designs could be famous." But I knew the truth. They didn't care about my designs or my career. They only cared about Tiffany winning, and I was simply a tool to be used and discarded. The hours I poured into the gown were countless, the effort excruciating. I used the finest silks, the most delicate lace, the most exquisite beads, all sourced from my rapidly dwindling savings. I sacrificed sleep, meals, even my own sanity, all for a dress that would ultimately be worn by someone who saw me as nothing more than a glorified maid. As the pageant drew closer, the pressure intensified. Marlene became increasingly demanding, her voice sharper, her criticisms more cutting. Tiffany, basking in the attention, treated me with a dismissive air, barely acknowledging my presence except to make snide remarks about my appearance or my skills. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible and unappreciated. The anger simmered beneath the surface, a volatile force threatening to erupt. But I kept it bottled up, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. I had a plan, a secret weapon that would turn their expectations on their heads. They thought I was broken, defeated, but they were wrong. The dress was nearly finished, a shimmering masterpiece of silk and lace. But the closer I got to the deadline, the more erratic Marlene's behavior became. She would hover over my shoulder, nitpicking every stitch, every bead, her voice a constant stream of criticism and demands. One evening, after I had been working for 18 hours straight, she came into my sewing room, her face contorted with displeasure. "Samantha, darling, Are you sure you're using the right shade of white? It looks a little dingy, she said, wrinkling her nose as if she had smelled something foul. I stared at her, my eyes burning with exhaustion and suppressed rage. It's the same shade we picked out together, Mom, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, it doesn't look right, she snapped. Maybe you should just start over. We can't have Tiffany wearing something that isn't absolutely perfect. The words hit me like a physical blow. Start over? After all the time, the effort, the sacrifice? The injustice of it all was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her precious Tiffany. But I knew it would be pointless. She wouldn't listen. She never did. So, I swallowed my anger and forced myself to remain calm. I'll see what I can do, I said, turning back to the dress, my hands trembling with suppressed emotion. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. The weight of the dress, the pressure from Marlene, the gnawing resentment, it all kept me awake at night. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of rebellion, of revenge. But I always came back to the same conclusion: I was trapped. Trapped by my family, trapped by my obligations, trapped by my own fear. I tried talking to my father, hoping that he would see the unfairness of the situation and intervene on my behalf. But he was always distant, preoccupied with his own problems, and unwilling to get involved in what he saw as women's issues. Just try to keep the peace, Samantha, he would say, patting my hand dismissively. You know how your mother gets when she's stressed. Keep the peace. As if my own well-being didn't matter. As if my dreams and aspirations were insignificant compared to Tiffany's beauty pageant ambitions. One afternoon, Tiffany came into my sewing room, her eyes flashing with anger. What is this hideous thing? She shrieked, pointing at the dress. It looks like something my grandmother would wear. I stared at her, stunned. I thought you liked it, I said, my voice trembling. Like it? She scoffed. Are you blind? The color is awful, the lace is cheap, and the whole thing is just pathetic. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I've been working day and night on this dress, I said, my voice rising in anger. I've sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me? Oh, don't act like you're doing me some big favor, she sneered. You're just doing what you're told. You're nothing but a glorified servant. Her words were like a slap in the face. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over. I'm your sister, I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. And I deserve to be treated with respect. Respect? She laughed. You haven't earned my respect. You're just a pathetic little seamstress who's too afraid to stand up for herself. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway, a cruel smile on her face. And by the way, she said, I told Mom I want a completely new design. This one is just unacceptable. The door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the sewing room, surrounded by fabric scraps and shattered dreams. I sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I had reached my breaking point. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my sewing room, staring at the unfinished gown, my mind filled with dark thoughts. I couldn't go on like this. I had to do something. I had to find a way to break free from the cycle of abuse and exploitation. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the room, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan that was both audacious and dangerous. A plan that would change everything. They thought they had broken me, but they were wrong. They had only awakened the sleeping dragon. And now, the dragon was about to breathe fire. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. The weight of their words, their actions, pressed down on me, suffocating me in a cloud of despair. I was nothing more than a tool, a servant, a shadow in my own life. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, a cruel awakening to the truth of my existence. The pageant loomed closer, a black hole threatening to consume what little light remained. I considered running away, disappearing into the anonymity of the city, leaving behind the suffocating expectations and the constant barrage of criticism. But where would I go? I had no money, no skills beyond sewing, and no one to turn to. They had systematically chipped away at my confidence, my self-worth, until I was nothing more than an empty shell. The thought of continuing down this path, of spending my life catering to their whims, filled me with a sense of dread. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Something had to change. I had to find a way to reclaim my life, to break free from the chains that bound me. But how? As I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered dreams, a spark of defiance flickered within me. It was a tiny flame, barely visible against the overwhelming darkness, but it was there. And it refused to be extinguished. I began to replay the events of the past few weeks, searching for a weakness, an opening, anything that I could use to my advantage. Marlene's obsession with Tiffany's success was obvious, a gaping vulnerability that she couldn't seem to control. And Tiffany, spoiled and entitled, was equally predictable, her arrogance blinding her to the world around her. They both thought they were untouchable, immune to consequences, but they were wrong. Everyone has a weakness, a chink in their armor. And I was determined to find theirs. The idea started as a whisper, a faint possibility in the back of my mind. But as I considered it further, it grew stronger, more compelling, until it became an all-consuming obsession. It was a risky plan, a dangerous game to play, but it was the only way I could see to reclaim my life. I would use their own ambition against them. I would exploit their weaknesses, their vanities, their insecurities. I would turn their dreams into nightmares. It wouldn't be easy. They would fight back, they would try to stop me. But I was no longer the timid, obedient girl they thought they knew. I had been pushed too far, broken too many times. And now, I was ready to break them. I started small, gathering information, observing their habits, their routines, their relationships. I listened to their conversations, I read their emails, I scrutinized their social media accounts. I learned everything I could about their lives, their secrets, their fears. And as I delved deeper, I began to uncover a web of lies, betrayals, and hidden agendas. Marlene, it turned out, had been skimming money from my father's business for years, using it to fund Tiffany's extravagant lifestyle and her own secret gambling habit. Tiffany, meanwhile, was secretly dating the boyfriend of one of her pageant rivals, a scandalous affair that would ruin her reputation if it ever came to light. The more I discovered, the more emboldened I became. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface now roared like a wildfire, fueling my determination and sharpening my resolve. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist, a planner, a force to be reckoned with. I began to document everything, recording conversations, taking pictures, collecting evidence. I knew that I needed proof if I was going to expose them, if I was going to bring their world crashing down around them. I worked in secret, carefully concealing my activities from their prying eyes. I smiled, I acted as if everything was normal, but inside, I was seething with rage and anticipation. They thought they had me fooled, but they were wrong. I was playing a game of my own, a game that they had no idea they were even participating in. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. I knew that the pageant was the perfect opportunity to strike. It was a public event, with a large audience and plenty of media coverage. It was the one place where I could inflict the most damage, where I could expose their lies and betrayals for the world to see. But I needed to be careful. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. They would be watching me, expecting me to crack under the pressure. But I wouldn't. I would use their expectations against them. I would lull them into a false sense of security, then strike when they least expected it. The days leading up to the pageant were a blur of activity. I finished the dress, making sure that it was absolutely perfect, not for Tiffany, but for my own purposes. I continued to gather evidence, refining my plan, anticipating every possible outcome. I barely slept, barely ate, consumed by my obsession with revenge. My family noticed my strange behavior, but they dismissed it as stress, as the pressure of the upcoming pageant. They had no idea what was really going on. They had no idea that their world was about to be turned upside down. I was ready. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. The day of the pageant dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I forced myself to eat breakfast, forcing down each bite as if it were sand. Marlene bustled around the house, barking orders and fussing over Tiffany, who was radiating an almost unbearable level of smugness. I plastered a smile on my face and played my part, offering to help with last-minute preparations, all the while secretly setting my plan in motion. My phone was my most valuable weapon. I'd spent weeks learning about digital forensics, how to trace IP addresses, how to recover deleted files, all skills I never thought I'd need but now were essential to my scheme. I had also invested in a tiny, high-definition camera disguised as a button, which I carefully sewed onto Tiffany's dress, positioned to capture everything she said and did backstage. It was a gamble, but I was confident that it would pay off. I smiled sweetly at Tiffany as I adjusted the dress, making sure the camera was perfectly in place. "You look beautiful, Tiffany," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "You're going to win for sure." She just smirked and turned away, oblivious to the fact that she was wearing a wire, broadcasting her every word to my hidden recorder. The drive to the pageant was tense. Marlene continued to criticize my appearance, my hair, my clothes, as if she needed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. I ignored her, focusing on the task ahead, replaying the plan in my mind, anticipating every possible contingency. Backstage was a chaotic scene of hairspray, makeup, and nervous energy. Contestants scurried around, adjusting their gowns, practicing their smiles, whispering to each other in hushed tones. I navigated the crowded room, pretending to be helpful, offering to fetch water, to fix makeup, all the while planting my own little surprises. I had learned about Marlene's gambling debts and had contacted one of her creditors, anonymously, of course, providing them with her exact location and a description of her outfit. I knew they wouldn't hesitate to confront her, especially with so many potential witnesses around. I also knew about Tiffany's secret affair and had prepared a series of anonymous text messages, complete with incriminating photos, to be sent to her rival's boyfriend during the pageant. The messages were timed to detonate at a crucial moment, causing maximum chaos and embarrassment. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the pieces of my plan fall into place. I felt a surge of exhilaration, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. I knew that if I was caught, the consequences would be severe. But I was past the point of no return. I had come too far, sacrificed too much, to back down now. I spotted Marlene across the room, her face flushed with excitement as she spoke to one of the pageant judges. I smiled and walked towards her, my hand reaching into my purse, where I had hidden a small USB drive containing all the evidence I had collected against them. It was time to unleash the truth. As I approached Marlene, I saw two men in dark suits push their way through the crowd, heading straight for her. They grabbed her by the arm, their voices loud and menacing. "Marlene, we need to talk about the money you owe us," one of them said, his grip tightening on her arm. Marlene's face turned white with terror as she tried to pull away, but they wouldn't let her go. The other contestants and their families stopped what they were doing and stared in shock. The pageant officials rushed over, trying to restore order, but the damage was already done. Marlene's reputation was in tatters, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before her eyes. I watched the scene unfold, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. It was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Tiffany was backstage preparing for her talent portion, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to engulf her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text message from an unknown number. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening in disbelief as she saw the photos of her and her rival's boyfriend. Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment as she realized that her secret affair had been exposed. Just then, her rival stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with fury. "You treacherous snake," she screamed, lunging at Tiffany. A catfight erupted, hair pulling, scratching, and shouting filling the air. The other contestants screamed and scattered, adding to the pandemonium. The pageant officials rushed in to break up the fight, but the damage was already done. Tiffany's chances of winning were gone, her reputation ruined. I stood back and watched the carnage, a small smile playing on my lips. My plan was working perfectly. The show began, but the atmosphere was already tainted. Marlene was nowhere to be seen, presumably dealing with her creditors. Tiffany, her face bruised and swollen, stumbled onto the stage, her voice shaking as she tried to deliver her opening remarks. The audience could sense the tension, the unease, the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was then that I made my move. I walked confidently to the sound system and plugged in the USB drive. A series of recordings began to play, Marlene's voice admitting to skimming money, Tiffany's voice bragging about her affair, both of them making disparaging remarks about me, about my father, about everyone they thought was beneath them. The audience gasped, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and disbelief. Tiffany stood on stage, frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror as her lies and betrayals were exposed for all to hear. I watched her crumble, her dreams shattering into a million pieces. It was the moment I had been waiting for. I took the microphone and addressed the audience, my voice clear and strong. "My name is Samantha," I said. "And I'm here to tell you the truth about my family." I proceeded to recount the years of abuse, the exploitation, the demeaning comments, the constant pressure to conform to their impossible standards. I spoke with passion, with conviction, with the full force of my pent-up anger and resentment. The audience listened in rapt silence, their faces filled with empathy and understanding. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood to their feet, cheering, whistling, showing their support for me, for my courage, for my honesty. Tiffany ran off stage, sobbing uncontrollably. The pageant was over. My revenge was complete. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening, broken only by Tiffany's hysterical sobs. I could see the sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes as she realized the extent of her exposure. It was a feeling I knew well, the feeling of being stripped bare, of having your deepest secrets laid out for the world to see. But this time I wasn't the one on display. This time I was the puppeteer, and they were my marionettes. The applause was intoxicating, a validation of my pain, a recognition of my strength. It was a moment I had dreamed of for so long, a moment that had sustained me through the darkest of times. But the show wasn't over yet. The real fireworks were about to begin. I had saved the best for last, a final act of defiance that would leave them utterly devastated. Their weakness was that they thought they were untouchable. I still remember the day I stumbled upon the truth. It was an accident, a chance encounter that changed everything. I had been searching through Marlene's computer, hoping to find evidence of her financial wrongdoings, when I stumbled upon a hidden file, password protected and heavily encrypted. My curiosity piqued. I spent weeks trying to crack the code, using every hacking trick I could find online. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I broke through. The file contained a series of documents, letters, and photographs that revealed a shocking secret. Tiffany wasn't my father's daughter. She was the result of an affair Marlene had with a wealthy businessman years ago. My father had no idea. He had raised her as his own, showering her with love and affection, completely oblivious to the truth. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. It explained so much: Marlene's obsessive need to control Tiffany, her constant fear of losing her, her willingness to do anything to ensure her success. It also gave me the ultimate weapon. I now held the power to shatter my father's world, to expose Marlene's lies, to destroy everything they held dear. I hesitated for a moment, questioning whether I should use such a devastating weapon. My father had been a good man, a loving father, even if he was blind to Marlene's true nature. But then I remembered all the pain they had inflicted on me, all the years of abuse and humiliation. And I knew what I had to do. I decided to reveal the truth in the most public and humiliating way possible. I created a slideshow of the documents and photographs, adding captions that highlighted the key details of the affair. I then uploaded the slideshow to a large screen behind the stage. As I spoke to the audience, exposing Marlene and Tiffany's lies, the slideshow began to play, revealing the shocking truth about Tiffany's parentage. My father, who was in the audience, watched in stunned silence as the story unfolded. His face went from confusion to disbelief to utter devastation. I could see the pain in his eyes, the realization that his entire life had been a lie. Marlene, who had managed to escape her creditors, rushed back into the auditorium just in time to see the slideshow. Her face was a mask of horror as she realized that her secret had been exposed. She screamed, she cursed, she tried to stop the slideshow, but it was too late. The truth was out there, for everyone to see. Tiffany, already reeling from the exposure of her affair, collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her world had completely fallen apart. The atmosphere in the auditorium was electric. People were gasping, whispering, pointing, their faces a mixture of shock and fascination. The media was in a frenzy, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling notes, eager to capture every moment of the unfolding drama. I stood on stage, bathed in the spotlight, feeling a sense of triumph I had never experienced before. I had done it. I had exposed their lies, I had revealed their secrets, I had brought their world crashing down around them. But the night wasn't over yet. There was one more surprise in store, a final twist that would seal their fate forever. I had spent weeks planning my escape, meticulously crafting a new identity, a new life, far away from the toxic influence of my family. I had saved every penny I could, squirreling away money from my meager allowance, selling some of my old clothes and belongings, doing whatever it took to amass enough capital to start over. I had also contacted a lawyer, who had helped me secure a restraining order against Marlene and Tiffany, preventing them from ever contacting me again. I was ready to leave, to disappear, to start a new chapter in my life. As the police escorted Marlene and Tiffany out of the auditorium, I turned to my father, my heart filled with a mixture of pity and resentment. He looked lost, broken, utterly defeated. I knew that he would never be the same. But I also knew that he deserved to know the truth. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But you needed to know." He didn't say anything, just stared at me with a blank expression. I knew that he would need time to process everything, to come to terms with the betrayal. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone in the wreckage of his life. As I stepped out of the auditorium, I was greeted by a throng of reporters, all clamoring for my attention. I ignored them, pushing my way through the crowd, heading towards the waiting taxi. I glanced back one last time, taking in the scene of chaos and devastation. It was over. I had won. But as the taxi pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something important, something that I would never be able to reclaim. The cost of my revenge had been high. But as I looked ahead, towards the unknown future, I knew that it had been worth it. I was free. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. But then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered it. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We know what you did," a voice whispered on the other end. "And you're going to pay." The line went dead. The whisper sent a chill straight through me, colder than any fear I'd felt before. The unknown number, the veiled threat, it was clear that even exposing their lies hadn't ended it. They, or someone connected to them, were coming after me. My carefully constructed escape plan suddenly felt fragile, like a sandcastle facing a tidal wave. The taxi sped through the city streets, each passing shadow seeming to hold a potential danger. I knew I couldn't go to the address I'd planned. That life, that identity, was already compromised. I had to disappear, truly disappear. I directed the driver to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a place where no one would think to look for me. Inside the dingy room, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, but I knew I couldn't rest. I needed to think, to plan, to figure out who was behind the threat and how to protect myself. The first thing I did was ditch my phone, smashing it into pieces before tossing it in a dumpster miles away. Days turned into weeks as I lived in the shadows, moving from motel to motel, always looking over my shoulder. I spent hours online, researching Marlene and Tiffany, digging into their past, searching for any clue that could lead me to my pursuers. I discovered a network of shady business associates, disgruntled employees, and jilted lovers, any one of whom could be seeking revenge on their behalf. The more I learned, the more dangerous the situation seemed. I realized that I wasn't just fighting my family anymore, I was up against a whole ecosystem of deceit and corruption. Then, I found it, a connection between Marlene and a notorious organized crime figure, a man known for silencing his enemies without hesitation. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. I knew I couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe me, and even if they did, I didn't want to risk exposing myself further. I decided to take matters into my own hands, one last act of defiance against the forces that had tried to control my life. I used the burner phone to send an anonymous tip to the authorities, providing them with all the information I had gathered on Marlene's connection to the crime figure, including dates, locations, and financial records. I knew it was a risky move, but I was desperate. I then leaked the same information to a rival crime family, knowing that they would be more than happy to settle the score. I had effectively turned Marlene and Tiffany against their own allies, creating a war that would consume them from the inside out. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only way to ensure their complete and utter destruction. I watched from afar as the authorities raided Marlene's mansion, arresting her and several of her associates on charges of fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. I also watched as the rival crime family launched a series of attacks against Marlene's business interests, crippling her financially and socially. Tiffany, caught in the crossfire, was abandoned by her friends and allies, left to fend for herself in a world that had suddenly turned against her. They lost everything, their money, their power, their reputations, even their freedom. Months later, I received a newspaper clipping in the mail, anonymously, detailing Marlene's conviction and sentencing. Tiffany, facing mounting legal bills and social ostracism, had reportedly left the country, seeking refuge in some distant land. They were gone, their lives in ruins, their reign of terror finally over. I felt a sense of closure, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I had carried for so long. But there was no joy, no triumph, only a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had tried to destroy me, but I had survived. I had fought back, and I had won. The memories of their cruelty would always linger, but they no longer had the power to control me. I had reclaimed my life, and I was finally free to live it on my own terms. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's the echo of a scream in a silent world, a declaration that you will not be a victim. It's the bitter medicine that cleanses the wound. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.